The diplomatic catastrophe. The Galactic Concordat prided itself on maintaining peace throughout the 12 major arms of the Milky Way. This was, of course, a spectacular falsehood that every spacefaring species politely pretended to believe. In reality, the Concordat was about as effective at preventing interstellar warfare as a paper shield was at stopping the supernova. The Concordat's headquarters, an impossibly elegant structure of crystalline spires and gravity-defying architecture, orbited a thoroughly unimpressive star in a thoroughly unimpressive sector, chosen specifically for its complete lack of strategic value to any species. The building itself was a monument to bureaucratic excess, with chambers that could accommodate every known sentient species, regardless of their environmental needs or physical dimensions. Ambassador Veyra of the Nulgorian Collective slithered through the grand atrium, the bioluminescent patterns on his serpentine body flickering with agitation. His aide, junior diplomat Veyra, struggled to keep pace, her forelegs clicking rapidly against the polished floor. "This meeting is doomed before it even begins," Veyra hissed, his translator rendering his pheromone-based speech into the standard galactic frequency. The hegemony of Vrax and the Solarian Empire have been trying to annihilate each other for 3 centuries. What makes the Council think they'll agree to peace now? Veyra adjusted her ceremonial sensory hood. "I've heard they're bringing in a specialist, Ambassador." Veyra's entire body froze mid-slither. "What kind of specialist?" "A human," Veyra whispered. The bioluminescent patterns on Veyra's body went from agitated blue to alarmed crimson. His respiratory sacs inflated to twice their normal size, and he emitted a high-pitched vibration that made nearby crystalline delegates develop tiny fractures in their outer casings. "A human." Veyra's translator struggled to maintain volume control. "Have they completely abandoned rational thought? Humans don't negotiate. They impose. They solve problems," Veyra suggested timidly. "Exactly." Veyra's color shifted rapidly through the ultraviolet spectrum, and their solutions involve completely unpredictable methodologies that violate every established diplomatic protocol. Remember the Zith Karga incident? Everyone remembered the Zith Karga incident. It was now required study at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, filed under situations to avoid at all costs, and cross-referenced with why humans should not make first contact. The Zith Karga were a hive-consciousness species of colonial fungi who had established a colony on an asteroid rich in radioactive minerals that humans had already claimed but hadn't yet developed. When the dispute arose, the Concordat had prepared for decades of careful negotiation. The human delegate had solved it in under 3 hours by introducing the concepts of time-sharing, mutual extraction rights, and something called a buddy system for safety protocols. Now the Zith Karga and humans co-owned the most efficient mining operation in 4 sectors, and nobody was entirely sure how that had happened. Human diplomacy is like using a black hole to crack open a nutrition shell, continued Veyra, his tail twitching with agitation. Yes, it works, but at what unforeseen cost? Across the chamber, the representatives of the hegemony of Vrax were making their entrance. They were massive quadrupedal beings with exoskeletons covered in elaborate technological augmentations that hummed with barely contained energy. Their compound eyes glittered with artificial enhancements, and the mandibles that framed their speaking orifices clicked continuously in what other species recognize as perpetual aggression. Almost immediately after, the delegation from the Solarian Empire glided in through a different entrance. The Solarians were gaseous entities contained within hovering crystalline vessels. Their translucent bodies pulsed with energy patterns that shifted between deep indigo and burning copper, the Solarian equivalent of barely contained rage. "Wonderful," Veyra commented dryly. "The Solarians have gone straight to imminent energy discharge mode, bypassing their usual preamble of condescending diplomacy. This bodes exceptionally poorly." A soft harmonic tone resonated through the chamber, signaling that the preliminary meeting was about to begin. The various delegations moved toward their assigned positions, carefully arranged to keep historical enemies separated by at least 3 neutral buffer zones. High Arbiter Zenith, a member of the ancient Quorum species and the highest-ranking official of the Concordat, floated to the central podium. Zenith resembled a collection of geometric shapes arranged in a vaguely humanoid configuration, composed of a substance that appeared solid but rippled like liquid. Their voice, when they spoke, contained harmonic overtones that produced a subtle calming effect on most species' neural pathways. Esteemed delegates, Zenith began, we convene to address the ongoing conflict between the hegemony of Vrax and the Solarian Empire, which has escalated to a critical juncture. The disputed territories in the Perseus Arm have become a flashpoint that threatens stability across multiple sectors. The lead Vrax representative stamped one massive limb, producing a boom that reverberated through the chamber. The territories are ours by ancestral claim. The Solarian incursion is nothing less than cosmic theft. The primary Solarian vessel brightened to near-blinding intensity. Ancestral claim. Your species hadn't even achieved nuclear fission when our ancestors first mapped those star systems. And they were off. For the next 20 minutes, the 2 delegations exchanged increasingly hostile accusations, historical revisionism, and thinly veiled threats of annihilation, all delivered with the exquisite formality that passed for diplomacy in galactic society. Thyleth leaned toward his aide. This is proceeding exactly as I predicted. Where is this human specialist they've supposedly recruited? Vress consulted her data matrix. According to the protocol schedule, the human mediator will be introduced tomorrow, at the formal commencement of negotiations. Thyleth's body settled into a pattern that indicated profound skepticism. That gives us approximately 18 hours to prepare for whatever chaos they're going to unleash. I suggest we update our emergency translocation protocols. Surely it won't come to that. Ambassador. Vress sounded hopeful but not particularly convinced. My dear Vress, Xyloph replied, his sensory tendrils focusing on her with the weary wisdom of a diplomat who had witnessed too many interspecies disasters. When it comes to humans, the only certainty is that whatever happens will be completely unpredictable. As if summoned by his words, a small commotion erupted near one of the side entrances. Heads, sensory appendages, perception organs, and various alien equivalents turned to observe as a delegation of Concordat security personnel entered, surrounding a single figure. Oh no! Xyleth's body paled to a sickly yellow. They're early. In the center of the security detail walked a human, not particularly tall by human standards, not particularly distinctive in any immediately obvious way. She wore the standard silver and blue uniform of a Concordat diplomatic consultant, though she had modified it in ways that probably violated at least 12 protocols. Her gait was relaxed, almost casual, a stark contrast to the rigid formality that pervaded the chamber. The human surveyed the room, and a smile spread across her face, a facial expression that most species in the galaxy had learned to regard with the same wariness one might show toward unstable antimatter containment. Well, the human said in a carrying voice that somehow cut through the chamber's ambient noise, this looks fascinating. Thyleth's body drooped in resignation. And so it begins. The arrival of the human mediator had exactly the effect one might expect. Absolute pandemonium disguised as diplomatic concern. The Vrax delegation immediately formed a defensive formation, their augmentation technology powering up with an ominous hum. The Solarian representatives, not to be outdone in the overreaction department, intensified their energy signatures, their crystalline vessels vibrating at frequencies that made nearby furniture resonate sympathetically. High Arbiter Zenith glided swiftly to intercept the human before she could cause an interstellar incident simply by existing in the same space as the conflicting parties. Consultant Carter. Zenith's harmonious voice carried a distinctly strained undertone. You weren't scheduled to be introduced until tomorrow's formal session. The human, Ileana Carter, apparently, shrugged, a gesture that sent ripples of anxiety through the more empathically sensitive delegates in the room. "Yeah, sorry about that. Caught an earlier transport. Figured I might as well get a feel for the room, you know. See the players in their natural habitat before all the formal posturing starts." Several nearby translation devices struggled to process the idioms, resulting in a cacophony of confused beeps, and one unit simply giving up and declaring metaphor malfunction before shutting down entirely. Xyloph, watching from what he hoped was a safe distance, groaned audibly. "They've been here less than a minute and already broken standard translation protocols." "Actually," Vresk whispered, "I think it's rather clever. By arriving unexpectedly, they're observing genuine reactions rather than prepared responses." "Don't you start admiring them," Xyloph warned. "That's how it begins. Next thing you know, you're helping them implement some scheme that shouldn't work but somehow does. And then you're filing your resignation from some pleasure planet you never intended to visit." Xenoth was attempting to steer Carter toward a side chamber, presumably to brief her on proper diplomatic procedure, or possibly just to hide her until the scheduled time. The human, however, had other ideas. With a maneuver that somehow managed to be simultaneously respectful and completely dismissive of protocol, she sidestepped the High Arbiter and walked directly toward the center of the chamber, where the Vrax and Solarian delegations were still maintaining their respective defensive postures. The security detail moved to intercept, but Carter waved them off with a gesture that somehow convinced the highly trained guards that everything was absolutely fine. No problem here. Definitely not about to witness a diplomatic catastrophe of historic proportions. "So," Carter said, stopping at a point equidistant between the two hostile delegations, "you must be the hegemony of Vrax." She nodded toward the massive arthropod-like beings, then turned to the hovering crystalline vessels. "And the Solarian Empire. Pleasure to meet you both. I'm Ileana Carter, the human they've brought in to help you stop trying to vaporize each other's planets." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. Direct acknowledgement of the conflict's violent nature was considered highly inappropriate in diplomatic settings, where everything was supposed to be wrapped in at least 17 layers of euphemism. Phrases like territorial disagreement and resource allocation dispute were acceptable. Vaporize each other's planets most definitely was not. The lead Vrax delegate's compound eyes blinked in asynchronous outrage. This is who the Concordat sends. A species barely out of its planetary atmosphere. A species that still relies on primitive biological functions for thought. The primary Solarian vessel pulsed with patterns that indicated equally profound indignation. "We agree, for once, with our Vrax counterparts. This assignment of a human negotiator can only be interpreted as a deliberate insult to both our civilizations." Carter didn't seem remotely bothered by their reactions. If anything, her smile widened. "Fascinating," she said. "You've been trying to obliterate each other for 3 centuries, but you can instantly unite in your disdain for humans. That's a starting point, don't you think?" Xyloph closed his sensory organs in anticipated horror. This was going to be a diplomatic disaster of unprecedented proportions. And somehow, he couldn't look away. The human solution. The official negotiation chamber of the Galactic Concordat was designed to inspire awe, promote cooperation, and subtly remind all participants of their cosmic insignificance. The ceiling displayed a real-time holographic representation of the galaxy, with conflict zones highlighted in pulsing red. Currently, the Perseus arm looked like it was suffering from a particularly aggressive case of stellar measles. Ambassador Xyloph slithered anxiously along the perimeter of the chamber, his bioluminescence patterns cycling through a spectrum that indicated extreme diplomatic distress. It had been 16 hours since the human diplomat's premature arrival, and in that time, Carter had managed to violate 43 different protocols, causing at least 6 minor diplomatic incidents and 1 case of respiratory arrest in a particularly sensitive methane-breathing delegate. And the official negotiations hadn't even started yet. "This is catastrophic," Xyloph muttered to Vress as they observed the delegates taking their positions. Did you hear what the human said to the Vrax Minister of Territorial Affairs at the preliminary reception? Vress adjusted her sensory hood nervously. I heard several versions, each more alarming than the last. She told them their exoskeletal augmentations looked like, and I quote, a cyberpunk chandelier having an identity crisis, then suggested they could improve efficiency by removing half of them. And the minister's response? Sylph's color patterns shifted to bewildered indigo. That's the truly disturbing part. After the initial shock, the minister actually removed 2 of their auxiliary processing nodes, declared they felt lighter, and continued the conversation as if nothing unusual had happened. Before Vress could respond, a resonating tone signaled the official commencement of negotiations. High Arbiter Zenith floated to the central podium, their geometric form arranged in what most species recognized as the configuration of extreme formality. Distinguished representatives, Zenith began, harmonic overtones precisely calibrated for maximum calming effect. We convene this historic session with hope for resolution of the conflict that has plagued the Perseus Arm for 3 centuries. As is customary, each principal party will present their position statement, followed by responses from neutral observers. Then our special consultant will. If I may interrupt. Eliana Carter's voice cut through the chamber with remarkable clarity for a being without amplification glands. She had somehow moved from her assigned position to stand directly beside the High Arbiter without anyone noticing her transit. Sylph hadn't even seen her move. Zenith's geometric form briefly destabilized, the equivalent of a startled jump. Consultant Carter, the protocol clearly, is getting in the way, Carter finished, smiling apologetically, but not backing down. I spent the last 16 hours reviewing the 300 years of documented negotiations between the hegemony and the Empire. Do you know what I found? The chamber went deadly silent. The same arguments, repeated with slightly different vocabulary, across 12 generations of diplomats. If we follow protocol today, we'll be here for another 6 months and achieve exactly nothing. And at the current escalation rate, at least 3 inhabited worlds will be rendered uninhabitable during that time. The lead Vrax delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. The human presumes to lecture us on our own conflict. The primary Solarian vessel pulsed with patterns of indignation. This is precisely why primitive species should not be involved in matters beyond their comprehension. Carter turned to face both delegations, and something in her posture made even the most antagonistic delegates pause. For the first time, Sylph had the distinct impression that they weren't looking at a diplomatic amateur, but something far more dangerous. "Let me tell you what I actually comprehend," Carter said, her voice deceptively soft. "I understand that this conflict began over mining rights to a cluster of 17 star systems, rich in quantum-stabilized thorium. I understand that the initial dispute was about who discovered those resources first. I understand that both sides have now spent more resources fighting over these systems than they could possibly extract from them in a millennium." She gestured toward the galactic display above, specifically at the pulsing red zone. "But most importantly, I understand that neither of you actually wants those star systems anymore. Your own internal strategic assessments, yes, I've read the classified ones, indicate that the disputed territory is now primarily valuable as a matter of principle, not resources." The chamber erupted into shocked murmurs. How had a human accessed classified strategic assessments from both sides? "Impossible," roared the Vrax delegation leader. "Absurd," pulsed the Solarian prime vessel. Carter didn't even blink. "Your Eminence," she addressed the Vrax leader, "on the 5th cycle of your 18th stellar revolution, you wrote in your private command log, and I quote, 'These cursed stars are worth less than insect waste, but hegemony honor cannot permit surrender.' Would you like me to continue with more examples?" The Vrax leader's mandibles fell completely still, a sign of absolute shock. Carter turned to the Solarian delegation. "Prime consciousness Tholux, 3 solar cycles ago, you transmitted to your inner council, and again I quote, 'The resource expenditure is irrational, but cultural algorithms demand persistence. Shall I continue? The Solarian vessel's energy patterns froze in patterns that Sylph recognized as the equivalent of stunned silence. Sylph felt his own respiration sacs constrict in horror. This human had somehow accessed the most secure communications of both civilizations. This wasn't diplomacy. It was an intelligence operation of unprecedented scope. How dare you? The Vrax leader finally managed to articulate, augmentation systems humming with battle readiness. This is not negotiation. This is blackmail. Extinction-level response authorized, pulsed the Solarian prime consciousness, their vessel glowing with energy buildup. Sylph instinctively slithered toward the emergency exit. This was about to become the shortest and most disastrous peace conference in galactic history. But Carter didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be simultaneously threatening and reassuring. "If I wanted to blackmail you, I would have done it privately," she said. "No, this is honesty, something that's been missing from these negotiations for 300 years. You're both trapped in a conflict neither of you wants, but neither can afford to abandon without losing face." She paused, letting her words sink in. "So I'm offering you an alternative, a third option that lets you both claim victory while actually achieving peace." The energy buildup in the Solarian vessel dimmed slightly. The hum from the Vrax augmentations decreased in intensity. Both were signs of cautious interest. High Arbiter Zenith had remained frozen in place, geometric form barely maintaining coherence. "Consultant Carter, this is highly irregular." "Successful diplomacy usually is," Carter interrupted, but gently this time. "With respect, Arbiter, sometimes irregular is exactly what's needed." She turned back to the delegations. "Here's my proposal. Neither of you gets the disputed territory." The chamber erupted again, this time with sounds of outrage from both primary delegations. Carter raised her voice just enough to cut through the noise. "Instead, the disputed systems will become autonomous, governed by representatives from both your civilizations, along with neutral third parties. You'll jointly develop the resources, with profits divided according to a formula I've already worked out based on your respective economic structures." She projected a complex mathematical equation into the center of the room. Even Sylph, with his limited understanding of advanced economics, could see it was elegantly constructed to give slightly more apparent advantage to the hegemony, while actually balancing real benefits equally. But Carter continued, "The truly valuable part isn't the resources. It's this. The Perseus Autonomous Zone becomes the first ever jointly administered military buffer territory in galactic history. Both your civilizations provide equal defense forces, creating the most powerful protected region in the galaxy. Any aggressor would have to face both your military might simultaneously." The Vrax leader's compound eyes flickered rapidly, their version of intense calculation. "You propose we deploy our forces, alongside Solarian units." "Under joint command," Carter confirmed, "creating a military alliance that would make any potential enemy think twice before threatening either of your civilizations." The Solarian prime consciousness pulsed contemplatively. "Our defensive capabilities combined would indeed present a deterrent of unprecedented magnitude." "Exactly," Carter smiled. "Instead of wasting resources fighting each other, you create a partnership that makes both your civilizations more secure. You transform a vulnerability into a strength. The disputed territory becomes a symbol not of conflict, but of strategic brilliance." Sylph couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The Vrax and Solarian delegations weren't rejecting the proposal outright. They were actually considering it. This would require unprecedented cooperation. The Vrax leader clicked thoughtfully. "Indeed," pulsed the Solarian prime consciousness. "Implementation challenges would be substantial. Which is why I've already drafted detailed implementation protocols," Carter said, transmitting an enormous data package to both delegations, including training programs for integrated command structures, technical specifications for compatible communication systems, and cultural integration guidelines to minimize friction between your forces. Kylef slithered closer to Vress. She came prepared for them to say yes. He whispered in astonishment. She anticipated their objections before they raised them. It's almost as if, Vress began. As if this was her plan all along, Xylef finished. The chamber had fallen into intense discussion as both delegations reviewed the proposal. After several minutes, the Vrax leader stepped forward. The hegemony finds merit in this concept, they announced, mandibles clicking in what could almost be described as excitement. The strategic advantages are considerable. The Solarian prime consciousness pulsed with cautious agreement. The Empire acknowledges the potential benefits. However, questions of implementation timing remain significant. Carter nodded, which is why I propose a phased approach, beginning with a ceremonial joint patrol mission to be conducted within 30 days. A visible demonstration of your new alliance, while the details of full implementation are negotiated. High Arbiter Zenith had finally recovered enough to speak. This is unprecedented in Concordat history. Sometimes history needs a push, Carter replied with a smile. Over the next 3 hours, Kylef watched in amazement as the human guided the two ancient enemies through preliminary agreement on a framework that would transform their 3-century conflict into a strategic alliance. The details were complex, the compromises delicate, but somehow Carter navigated each potential obstacle with ease. When the session finally adjourned, both delegations departed not with their usual barely contained hostility, but with something resembling cautious optimism. Delegates who had been planning each other's annihilation for generations were actually engaged in civil conversation as they exited the chamber. Xylef couldn't contain himself any longer. He slithered up to Carter as she gathered her materials. How? He demanded, bioluminescence patterns cycling through confusion. How did you know they would accept? How did you access their classified communications? How did you formulate a solution that both would find acceptable? Carter smiled, and for the first time, Xylef detected something beneath the diplomatic facade. Something ancient and calculating. Ambassador Xylef, do you know why humans are so effective at diplomacy? Because you're unpredictable, he answered automatically. She laughed. No. Because we understand what other species often forget, that beneath all the cultural algorithms, biological imperatives, and historical grudges, most intelligent life wants the same thing: security, prosperity, and a legacy. We just find the path that satisfies those needs for everyone involved. But the classified communications, Carter winked. I never actually read any classified communications. I just made educated guesses based on psychological profiles and economic data. Their reactions confirmed what I already suspected. Xylef's entire body went rigid with shock. You bluffed. To the two most powerful military forces in the galaxy. I presented a truth they already knew but couldn't admit, even to themselves, she corrected. Sometimes that's what diplomacy requires, a mirror, not a mediator. As Carter walked away, Vress slithered up beside Xylef. I've been reviewing the implementation protocols she provided. Vress said, sensory hood twitching with excitement. They're brilliant. The joint military command structure she designed actually creates interdependence that would make renewed conflict virtually impossible. Xylef's bioluminescence patterns slowly shifted to thoughtful blue. So the human solution wasn't just stopping the current conflict. It was preventing all future conflicts between them. Vress finished. By making them stronger together than apart. Xylef watched as Carter chatted amicably with delegates from various species across the chamber. To casual observation, she appeared to be nothing more than a friendly diplomat engaging in post-session pleasantries. But Xylef now saw something different. He saw a predator among prey, a strategist among tacticians, a chess master among checkers players. Perhaps, he mused, the galaxy's fear of human diplomacy isn't because they're unpredictable. Then why? Asked Vress. Because they see patterns we miss, vulnerabilities we overlook, and opportunities we can't imagine. Xylef's colors shifted to respectful indigo. We fear them not because they're chaotic, but because they understand order better than we do. 6 months later, the first Joint Frax-Solarian Defense Fleet conducted its inaugural patrol through the newly established Perseus Autonomous Zone. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, with the commanding officers of both civilizations standing side by side on the bridge of a newly designed hybrid command vessel. Ambassador Veyra watched the broadcast from his office in the Concordat headquarters, his bioluminescence patterns glowing with grudging admiration. On his desk sat a small gift that had been delivered that morning, a primitive Earth item called a snow globe. Inside was a miniature representation of the Perseus arm, with tiny ships from both civilizations patrolling peacefully. Attached was a handwritten note that simply read, "Sometimes the best solution isn't winning the game, it's changing it. Regards, E.C." Veyra's body rippled with a soft chuckle as he activated his communication console. "Connect me with the Diplomatic Training Division. We need to update our curriculum on human negotiation tactics immediately." As he waited for the connection, he gently shook the snow globe, watching the glittering particles swirl around the peaceful scene. Perhaps humans weren't such a diplomatic catastrophe after all. They were simply playing a longer, deeper game than anyone else in the galaxy had realized. And somehow, that was both more reassuring and more terrifying than anything Veyra had previously imagined.